Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the Sick Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. 8 companies in 13 years. That's what today's guest has turned into a good thing. Now, if you remember, Alan, back in the day, that would prevent you from earning your gold watch for years of service with the same company. You remember the days when people would stay with one company for 30 or 40 years?
I do. I think my dad was at his company for 34 years, if I have the math down correctly.
So did he get a gold watch after it was all done?
It's a good question. I think we got a free vacation to Disneyland or Disney World one year because they worked him to the bone, but I don't recall if he got any wrist jewelry.
So I looked it up, and I think it was on Forbes.com. The watch, the significance of the watch came with when you would work for the Pepsi company, and the significance was you put in so much time with the company, so we'll give you a gold timepiece. And back then, gold was worth a lot less. But those days are over. I'd like to know, before we get into it with Anthony Hernandez, last episode we talked about how you were hanging out in the hood in Brooklyn with Willie Nelson. What's been going on since then?
Yeah, nothing so exciting this week on that front, but my 16-year-old boys just got a homework assignment where they needed to put together podcasts for themselves. And they recorded podcasts. I don't know what they titled them. And Jonah did one with his buddies exploring the streets of Brooklyn. They found some abandoned bus with its windows blown out, kind of like a war scene. And Lucas had a great conversation with his buddy where they were talking about what their parents did. And they had a funny anecdote about how I was trying to sell Kadima's products to his friend's mom, which I did at some point, actually. So, I have some aspiring podcasters in my house.
Interesting. You and I have something in common. Then I also have a 16-year-old, and for one of his projects, he too had to produce a podcast for his. It was one of his music classes for some reason. But that's pretty coincidental.
Based on my knowledge of you, I'm sure the sound quality and the recording quality was a hell of a lot better than my boys.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to that. All right, so getting back to Anthony Hernandez, should I apply for a job with Anthony Hernandez Incorporated?
It's a good question. And Anthony actually talks about it in this interview, about how he has looked at his career as almost a company. And I think he refers to it also as Anthony Hernandez Incorporated. But he has taken such a proactive approach to his career and the way he's been thoughtful about targeting companies. And you will hear in this episode the top 8 companies that really excite him now, and how he has been proactive with his approach to networking and getting into these companies. I think you're going to learn lots on this episode with Anthony.
All right, looking forward to it. So let's get into it with Anthony Hernandez.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited. I think it represents a voice and a perspective that definitely is needed, especially for folks who are trying to figure out what's next. About myself, so I'm Anthony Hernandez, born and raised in New York City from 2 really proud Dominican parents. So cut my teeth sort of in technology and, the workforce. Actually, really early in my career in college, I got a great internship at a company called Accenture, which is a consulting company. And it really worked out for me because I like to tell people I have sort of professional ADD. Like I get really excited about something and then lose interest in it sort of right away and have a hard time sort of locking in. And consulting was a great place to first start because there are so many different methodologies and businesses and technologies that you're sort of interacting with. It was a great way to sort of like really just sort of have a crash course in technology. So I did that for a couple of years as an internship and learned a ton. Unfortunately, at the end of the course, I kind of decided maybe consulting wasn't quite right for me. I ended up getting a great opportunity to work at an advertising firm up in New York City, blocks away from my university, Baruch College, City University of New York, which was really funny because when people would see me walking down the streets and say, like, didn't you just graduate? It's like, I did, but work is over here and Baruch College is over there. So it was a really great experience, doubly because I was really interested in advertising and this new technology was sort of breaking through called the internet and digital advertising. And so I got sort of a front row seat to sort of see how SEO and ads technology was working and how the tech stack worked. Unfortunately, it was also 2008, so the economy sort of bottomed out and I had to go figure out what unemployment was like. But then after that, I got a great opportunity at a tech startup called TerraCycle out in Trenton, New Jersey. And so there I went from sort of being an account manager at Digitas, at the advertising firm, over to at TerraCycle working as sort of a business development person, sort of closing deals. Did that for a little bit. And then I closed a really great deal that brought us down to Brazil. And then through a friend of a friend made a connection at Google. And I'd always been interested in Google and basically say, hey, I'm doing this. It's okay, but I don't know if this is sort of the right long-term trajectory for me. And he's like, well, we're spinning up a team at Google, sort of figuring out this thing called YouTube. Have you heard of it? And I was like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll come on down and figure that out. So I actually joined Google as a contractor for a bit, did that for a little while, which is awesome. And then eventually got converted into full-time at Google. And then I sort of really immersed myself in technology, which is fantastic. Did that for a little bit, decided I wanted to sort of break out on my own, to really level up in technology, and ended up getting a gig as a product manager at a startup. And that brought me from New York City all the way down to Miami, which was fantastic. So, I moved down to Miami, really saw a really early technology scene that I got excited about, was able to kind of go from that education company called Genius Plaza into Royal Caribbean, which is super fun because this is I'd been in sort of these tech companies for a bit, and now I was in this space where, they weren't technology forward, not a knock on Royal Caribbean. They're really sort of a customer family first company and not necessarily a technology company. They brought us on board to sort of spin up their tech, did that for a little bit longer. And then I got hit with the COVID special and they laid off a ton of us. And then I ended up at Amazon Prime Video working, sort of scaling up their technology to bring on large studios, which is really exciting to do in 2020 to 2021. Did that also for a little bit. And then someone knocked on my door and said, hey, there's this really incredible space that's happening in crypto technologies and currencies and around this new thing called NFTs. And I said, yeah, hell yeah, that'd be super interesting. And so I applied and ended up getting a great role at OpenSeas, and that's what I've been doing. So very long-winded, but that's essentially the last 10 years for me. And yeah, super excited to sort of share a little bit of what I've been up to and hopefully help someone out there.
Yeah, and that's a great recap. And it's a bit winding and almost, it could be a little random from people from the outside. And you and I were talking before we started taping here, and you mentioned it's okay not to know where you want to end up. And it sounds like you've kind of lived what you were telling me before. Elaborate on that a little bit about what that sentence means to you and how you apply that to your life.
It's a really good observation and super clear. It kind of seems rambly and sort of disjointed. And I like to tell a lot of folks that job titles are important for sure. I'm not going to diminish that, but it's even more important that you hone what your core skill set is. And for me, and I learned this all the way from my time with the consulting companies, I like solving problems and I really love technology and I love scaling things. So those are the three things that I was like, I don't know what that translates to into job titles. I don't know what that looks like in 10 years or 20 years, but all I know is that whatever I do needs to have some triangulation between those three things. And one of the things, if you can draw a line through my career, all those three things are true. So it's always grounded in some kind of technology. It's always grounded in sort of scaling like an area where there's a problem and no one knows how to fix it, and figuring out a way to sort of mechanize and improve those things and make things a little bit more consistent. And then it's always sort of about, okay, well, now the company or the project is at this level. How do we get to this other level, Anthony? And so my journey through, for example, at Digitas was essentially, hey, there's this new ad format or system of sort of scaling out technology, but we don't know how it works. What are the metrics here that matter? And so that was where I was adding value, sort of stringing those things together with the background that I got in analytics at Accenture. And then moving over to TerraCycle was essentially, hey, we just closed this really wonderful deal in Brazil, but no one knows how the Brazilian market works. Go down and figure out how we take a US operation and scale that in Brazil. And then with Google, it was the same thing too. Like, we've acquired this YouTube ad product, a YouTube company. We don't know necessarily how we're going to monetize it. We have a bunch of ideas around sort of ad products, but hey, why don't we get a couple of folks to come in and sort of help us figure out what's the mechanism and how do we make this a smoother process, not just for our internal sales team, which was the primary focus, but then for our advertisers who are sort of seeing this new paradigm shift in, now it seems like super obvious if you're in the ad space, of course, cost per view and things like that. But again, like go back in time 10 years, not super obvious, right? We're talking about a traditional TV buying industry now being told, hey, this video with the dog on a skateboard is just as valuable as, Jay Leno, who was sort of on there at the time, right? Like these are equivalent things. So that's what's sort of been true through my career trajectory is like, I'm the guy that you throw into the thing that no one wants to fix and has like a messy new shiny technology that everyone's really excited about, but we're not exactly sure about how it's supposed to work. For another example too, is like at Royal Caribbean, I was working on like, oh, cruise ships, how awesome. No, what I was working on was facial recognition technology at the terminals and helping sort of speed up the boarding process over there. And then also augmented reality games. So again, when I talk to folks about that, like you sort of have to own what the narrative of your career is. You don't necessarily have to focus on the title, but focus on the problems that you solve, the value that you bring in. And as long as you stay consistent there, then the hiring manager may not know what to do with like all the jumble of roles on or companies on your resume. But when you have a very clear thread that like Anthony's a problem solver and he likes the nasty, scary problems, like, oh, okay, well, I know exactly where to throw this guy because every company under the sun has a scary, nasty problem that no one wants to deal with. And they like instantly, like when they're talking to me, they're like, I don't know what this guy's about. But like 30 minutes after hearing me talk about all sort of the scary stuff I've sort of dealt with, and they're like, okay, I know exactly where to throw this guy.
So you're able to articulate your story well. Some people might think differently looking at your LinkedIn profile, but it has not impacted your ability to find roles. And lots of people talk about, oh, does it look bad to switch? And looking at your LinkedIn profile, it looks like you've had a pretty impressive career and about 13 years of experience, about 8 different companies, if I have the numbers right. I generally tell people that that's a limiting belief, that they should not worry about multiple jobs on there and it doesn't hinder you, but everyone's always scared of that. I'm curious, in your experience, how often has that come up in your job search? And if so, how did you handle that?
Oh man, really good question. So it really depends on where you are in your career. Early on, you'll run into a lot of recruiters and people in like college advancement or executive coaches who will say, jumping around doesn't look good. The later you get in your career, then jumping around is sort of okay. And I sort of like to preface this by saying, you know, when you're early in your career, you don't have a strong track record. Bouncing around can be sort of a red flag to some recruiters. But later in your career, a lot of the CMOs or the CXO roles you see are usually 2-year stints, right? It's like you get in there, they bring you in to do a very specific thing and get the job done and you move on. The way I look at it in my career is a little bit more holistically. So again, back to the data side of it. If you were to look at sort of the average age of companies about 30, 40 years ago, the average company was about 10, 20, 30 years old, meaning that it was very viable, or like for our parents, right, to like get a company, join a company and work there for 50 years and get the golden watch and have a beautiful retirement, right? I also love that I'm dating myself, that people are like, a golden watch, what is this guy talking about? But now if you take a look at what the average age of most companies are, I think it's about 7 or 8 years. Meaning that if your career is a nice long career, there's a very good chance you're going to end up at more than a few companies, right? And so the way I like to think about it is you really have to start thinking about yourself very much as a business, in that I'm Anthony Hernandez, Inc., whatever that means, and I represent a suite of skills and abilities and talents that can be done at any company under the sun for the most part. And so the way I really think about my career is, yeah, I might move around a lot because I'm doing very specific things at those companies. And once those roles and particular tasks are complete, I usually move on. Don't get me wrong, I've had very long stints. So for example, like Google's probably the longest run that I had at a company. That's because there were a ton of really big challenges, really exciting, interesting challenges, not to knock the companies where I'm at where it's a smaller stint, but usually because that's a much more acute focus. So the way I sort of like to frame it to a lot of folks, maybe a recruiter, is, hey, Anthony, I see that you've been, I don't know, the average time at a company is about 2 or 3 years. And I'll usually say, because that's usually the cycle for most companies, right? It's like you pitch this really crazy idea, you put a budget against it, you hire some folks, you deploy some technology, you get results, you refine a little bit, and then the thing is sort of done. That's usually my life cycle, right? Especially in product space, is they bring me in to sort of launch the big scary thing. It takes me a while to sort of hire folks, put the OKRs together, get very clear on what we want this thing to be in terms of product market fit, launch the sucker. It never quite goes perfectly the first time. You make a couple of refinements, of course, and then you leave it in a really good place. And usually by that point, then it's the question for me, Anthony, like, am I the career road warrior? Like, am I here to sort of see the thing get scaled up for the next 5 years? Up front with a lot of these companies, like, I get kind of bored. Like, I'm not really here to spend 5-6 years sort of skilling up a lot of folks and training them. Like, I get more excited about the nice shiny object. And at that point, they're like, no, okay, we get it. So you're not going to be 20 years of management material. No, that is not my friend. I'm more of an IC. Like I'm a really strong individual contributor. I've managed folks and I can do it. But that's when the team is like on one hand. Like if it's 5 folks on one hand, let's do it. But like I've never been excited to like run a division of 30 people, 100 people. Like I can't do it. Alan, honest truth, I can't do it. I'm not built. So again, bit of a rambly answer, but that's essentially how I think about the career and progression. Like, again, you got to own the narrative, but you also have to be just really upfront with the recruiter and say, hey, look, if you're looking for someone to be like a people leader and do this role for the next 20 years, I'm probably not your best bet. But then more realistically, and I think the conversation is changing in the industry, where a lot of recruiters know, hey, I can't really ask this guy to be here for 7 or 8 or 9, 10 years. Our company may not even be here for 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years. But it doesn't mean I'm not here to sort of roll up and scale up a division. And so I think that's how it's translated on the resume. We'll see if I've convinced you with my answer, but that's sort of my POV.
No, and I'm a firm believer. I'm trying to think about the alternative perspective of folks that are a little hesitant to move around as much. So you may not know if your resume is not getting selected because you have so many different experiences on your resume. But once you get to talk to a human, a recruiter or a hiring manager, how often would you say they bring this up as a potential thing that you need to explain? And how often do you think you've been dinged after? Because like you have a good narrative for it. So
thank you.
So once you get to that stage where like, how often is it brought up? And then how often do you get past that obstacle?
Oh man. So I'll be very honest. I probably have that question brought up way earlier. So rather earlier in the career. So I would say, maybe in like 2016, 17, 18, people would bring it up. A lot of that, though, probably went away because of the time at Google. People want me for that level of talent. But honestly, after 2015, no one ever brings it up. And I think it's because the caliber of companies and the success that I could point to makes it go away. So earlier in the career, like I would say, like even when I was interviewing while I was at Google, I had still been relatively stable, but once I left Google, maybe 1 or 2 recruiters sort of asked me about it. And the questions were, so you've moved around a little bit. Usually they want to know why. They want to know, like, did you get fired or did something happen? And usually once you kind of like make those questions go away, then they're like, okay, there's no red flag here. And now later in my career, I couldn't tell you in the last 4 years, I don't think anyone's brought it up.
So, right. Is there any negative in your mind doing these moves? Because I think there's tremendous positive. And I think some of the positives are you expand your network, you expand your experiences, you learn different management styles at Accenture, Amazon, Royal Caribbean, Google. They're very different cultures and people and things that you can absorb and take with you. But what are negatives? Do you think it hindered any of your compensation trajectory, or like what are some of the negatives of your path?
That's a tricky one, right? So I think there are some negatives to bouncing around too much. So one of them is kind of like what I said before. It's harder to get in sort of those upper echelons of leadership if you don't have a long track record of like setting up the thing at the company and being able to say, hey, I grew that division X over X for 5 years. So that's sort of the ding from a narrative standpoint. If you move around that much, although you might have 2-3 years at a company, it's harder to say, I'm going to give leadership of a massive division to this person who has, 1 or 2 years of sort of senior leadership experience, right? Even the company, even if I've been at a company for 2-3 years, I could see the hesitancy there. Luckily for me, I'm not looking for those types of roles and opportunities. But if I were somebody who wanted to sort of eventually maybe, and this is maybe more interesting for like a sales standpoint. If I'm a big sales guy and I want to lead a division, it's a lot harder to sort of say, hey, I've been at 5 different companies for 2 years at a time. And you should definitely let me lead this new sales division that you have launching these really cool AR glasses. Versus if you see somebody come in from Salesforce or you see somebody come in from Slack and has 8 years of leadership experience on a sales team, I would say, I'd like all the experience, a variety of experience that you have, but man, having 8 years of experience in growing a team, you have a lot of sort of that nuance of like leading folks, firing folks, hiring folks, or reorging, shifting the industry, getting that sales collateral out there. Although that guy with a lot of varied experience might have that, you might want that stable leadership. So those are some, I think, the bigger cons is not having that wealth of experience managing a team and being able to point back and be able to say, I have 15 people who can refer me and say that, yeah, we've seen Anthony scale it from 2 individuals to 30 individuals. But outside of that, I don't see a lot of huge negatives to jumping around versus staying at a place for 10 years.
Do you think it's impacted your compensation trajectory positively, negatively, or neutral versus some people that you've seen that have stayed in the same roles?
Yikes, Alan, you're trying to get me in trouble. I will say this kind of emphatically. Jumping around has had fairly obscene benefits to my compensation. And it's really funny. I have sort of two, let's not use any names. I have two folks that I know who are sort of my kind of A/B testing groups. I have a person who stayed at the company, won't name the company, for a long amount of time, and we catch up on a regular basis. And, we've gotten to the point where we're like, hey, we're kind of honest about compensation, and we've kind of talked about it. And if I had to give you sort of a rough estimate, I'm probably 40% ahead of him in terms of comp. He beats me a little bit when it comes to sort of equity, but if we're talking total package, I definitely got him beat. And then another person, fantastic person who we were at the same company for a bit. We sort of compare notes. She stayed there for quite some time. And there's also sort of there's a delta in our compensation. Again, not as large as the other gentleman, but I would say I'm probably 15 to 20% ahead of her in terms of total comp. But I don't know, maybe that might have to do with some other things, generational things or gender things in terms of pay comp. But from the two examples that I've seen, I think moving around has had way bigger financial benefits than maybe staying at one place for a long time.
It's interesting. I looked at my comp in 2010 versus 2020, and I went to 7 different companies between American Express and Salesforce, and my comp went up 4.3 times. And like some people are starting to comment on there of seeing how many companies over that 10-year period and what was your comp increase. So anyway, if you want to reply to that, that'd be cool.
For sure. And congratulations. Good for you. That's amazing.
Well, because I'm a strong believer in it, but there's a lot of hesitancy of making a move. And like your brother he was a little less hesitant to jump so quickly. So what do you think is different about your thought process versus your brother or versus other people that you see? Like, what makes it so easy for you to say, hey, if a better opportunity comes along, I'm going to take it?
You know what? I think it's a generational thing. And I mean this with like love and sincerity to my brother. Apologies in advance, Eddie. I think having my first job out of school, been at an advertising agency, and then seeing the 2008 sort of economy bottom out, and then getting laid off from that company, from the advertising company, sort of put a chip on my shoulder, which is you sort of can't depend on these companies, right? Even if they have the best intentions. And so it sort of bred within me a really fierce independent streak to basically say, titles might, there you go, here's the psychosis. Titles may go, and then comps may go, but your core skill set is always yours and yours to be owned. I knew some people at some of the firms that have been there for years and years. And when they got laid off, we all had to grab our boxes and load up our stuff. And so I think for me versus maybe other folks who maybe came out of sort of that recession, their mentality was, it was so hard to get a job. Now that I have this job, I have to be eternally grateful and sort of cling on to this place because I don't want to be back in that dark place. Versus me, I was at a company, but got laid off shortly after I sort of got hired there, and that putting a chip on me to be sort of very independent and sort of always looking, and not that I'm not loyal to the company, but more loyal to my career and my skill set. And I think that's sort of the great divide is that I would say, and I kind of see it in some of the folks that I'm hiring now, is a streak between people who were in the job market between 2000 and then 2010 have a very different POV than folks who are 2010 to like 2020. And that's because we've all seen some things, and those things have really given us sort of a Maslow hierarchy of need reaction, right? Like trust and safety. Well, then I want to stay right here. I don't want to rock the boat. Oh, I had that safety, and that safety can be taken away. I don't want to rely on anyone else. And I think that's the divide.
Yeah. And it's a resiliency and experience that comes. And it sounds like with Digitas, you might have been let go of. I've been fired multiple times in my career, and you just realize that shit happens. Sometimes it's out of your control, sometimes it's in your control, but the company can get rid of you like that. Everyone in the US and most companies that I've worked with are employee at will. And the company can hire you or fire you at will. You as an employee can stay or leave at will. There are things you want to do and not burn bridges, but you are legally allowed to do that.
Exactly right. And I think that was sort of the big takeaway for me is you can do everything right and be let go. And then you could see some situations where you kind of screw things up forever and ever, and then someone sits in a really nice, cushy position. And so I'm a big fan of like, I can't control what the other person can do. I can only control what I can do. And so I stay laser focused on that, essentially, which is if I'm in a company and we're doing really, really well, and I see an opportunity and I don't think the company's maybe grasping that opportunity in the right way, and I think this is going to be the next big thing, for a lot of folks, they might say, no, let me stick it out with this company, right? Because I have trust in leadership and I think they're going to do really well. My mentality when I see a really huge opportunity is I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to do my absolute best to convince this company that this opportunity is huge. I'll give you a year or two, but in a year or two, if I still feel really solid, like this is the right move, then I'm going to go jump to that opportunity because I don't want to risk the benefit on the upside for my career of missing out on that opportunity. And it's always paid really good dividends. It's also one of the reasons why I get in trouble for sort of chasing always the shiny object, because there's always going to be a shiny object. But I always feel like since I know I don't want to climb that career ladder at that level, I don't want to be the person who spends, 20 years at Ford. It's okay for me to make that with the trade-offs that come along with it. But the benefit, though, and I think this sort of alludes to sort of your earlier questions and your earlier points, is because you always chase not necessarily the shiny object, but maybe the new sort of paradigm in the industry, there's always going to be somebody out there who wants to hire you for it. And that's sort of the change, right? Is that if you stay at the company, there used to be a world that really rewarded the guy who spent 20 years at, and maybe not pick on these guys, but 20 years at AT&T. But in some ways, we talked about the negatives, but we can also talk about the negatives on the other side of it, right? There's a real perception in the industry, particularly around tech, is maybe you don't want the guy who's been at AT&T for 20 years because they're really locked into one paradigm for how this thing is supposed to work. And I think we've all seen industries getting disrupted left and right. So some folks may think of that as like, ooh, is he or she really to switch gears and think about things in a new way or challenge the status quo? Or is this guy really ready to be David versus Goliath? And that's one thing I think is really helpful. And especially when I'm joining sort of the upstart company, is they like the fact that Anthony has been David for a very long time. He apparently likes really being David. And every now and then he gets the win. Like, let's bring this guy on board.
Cool. Let's just do a quick survey of your 8 companies and tell me how you got the job. So like, what was it, like a blind application or connection? Just like a quick, we'll do a speed round. Your intern as an analyst at Accenture.
How I got there was an Inroads, a connection.
Okay. So you knew somebody.
Yeah, I knew somebody.
Is Inroads a program or you're just saying that Inroads there?
Sorry. Yeah, I should have been more clear. Inroads is a program to help diverse folks land internships at Fortune 5,000 companies. They usually pair you up, and the goal is that you work there for a couple of internships, and then you should get a role.
Okay, cool. Digitas.
I knew somebody.
Network.
She had it for me.
TerraCycle.
I knew somebody.
Okay. Google as a TVC.
I knew somebody.
Okay. And then you left Google as a TVC and then you came back as a full-time. So how did you get that role?
I knew somebody who really looked out for me. Really appreciate him.
Okay. And then
if you're out there, thank you so much.
Do you want to give the person a shout out, the name? Or?
Yeah. So the first person was Sachin. He helped me get the role at Google when I came back as a full-timer, for sure.
Genius Plaza?
I knew somebody.
Okay.
Well, I didn't know them directly, but somebody knew somebody and they introduced me. It's the same thing.
RCL, Royal Caribbean?
Applied blind. That was the first one where I applied and somebody was like, yeah, okay, let's work this out.
Okay. Amazon?
I knew somebody.
And OpenSea?
I knew somebody.
Okay. So I see a pattern here, network. And well, let's talk about the Inroads thing first, actually, before we get to the network. So talk a little bit about the program, how you got involved in that, and what benefit that provided you.
For sure. So nothing but love, tremendous respect for the Inroads program. So the Inroads program is a program that sort of takes sort of high potential college folks of color and women as well. And it gives them an opportunity at these Fortune 5,000 companies. So I actually didn't know anything about the program. And then in passing, someone in college basically said, hey, I heard about this program called Inroads. It could be really interesting. And I'll be honest, I was like, I'm not really interested. And then later on, sort of in that same semester, someone else reached out to me, a friend of mine's in just casual conversation who's doing pretty well. And I'm like, hey, man, you got this really great job. I did this internship over the summer. How did that work out? And it's like, oh, I'm in Inroads. It's like, oh, someone told me about Inroads. Sounds really cool, but it sounds like a lot of work. Like, I'm not really interested in that. And he kind of just, had like a sit down with me. He's like, no, man, Inroads is really important. It's a really great internship. It's not just an internship. There's also mentoring and a lot of workshops and trainings. And so those workshops and trainings were really sort of foundational to sort of my interviewing style and my strategies. And then also when I get in the role, making sure I can add value right away. It's one of the biggest things I think about when I join a company is before I join and people start asking me, what's your 90-day plan, a 60-day plan? I'm like, when I land at whatever company it is, what am I going to be able to say in 6 months is like, hey guys, you hired me, you took a shot on me, and here's this really awesome thing that I've delivered. I'm always like very fixated on like, what are the quick wins? What are the low hanging fruits so that these guys like are not second guessing me in a couple of months? And so Inroads and a lot of the mentorship there was very foundational, right? Because you interned at a company, you sort of had 3 months to sort of impress these guys and let them know that you were sort of worth your weight in salt or something. So my mind was always sort of fixated like, short-term wins, like what can I do? What can I deliver? How can I add value? Like every little drop or every little gem that like a manager or somebody on the team would sort of say about whatever it is that we were working on. I was like, oh, okay, Alan brought that up that like they're really struggling with this data set. Like maybe I should figure out like an Excel like formula or sheet that can like deliver that really quickly and save them some time. Or, Kevin over here mentioned that like they're really struggling with that. Maybe I can develop like an SOP, like a standard operating procedure to sort of make that a little bit easier for them. So then like in 2-3 months, we're like, yeah, so what do we think about this Anthony guy? We could be like, well, he's doing okay over here, but like these 4 things that we were like casually asked him for, he like knocked it out of the park. So that was really one of the many big values of Inroads. And then second to everything else is the network. So then they're churning out all these really great, incredible folks and placing them in really high roles. So it's always sort of really helpful and beneficial to sort of, we all relatively most of us kept in touch. And, they were working at a really great company. I use that all the time to kind of suss out, is this a company I wanted to work at? I'd call up my friend and be like, hey, man, you interned there and you converted. You've been there for 5 years. Worth it? Like, and people are very candid because, again, we've all known each other since basically college. And, 6, 7, or 8 years later, there isn't that sort of like hesitancy to sort of talk about compensation or how you move up. And so having a network and then having that sort of training and then being exposed to these companies so early in my career was like a really incredible combination. Does that answer that? Did I miss
that? No, that's fantastic. And I know I met you through the Sage Guru program at Google, where there's another opportunity where you can get some leadership and guidance. Well, talk a little bit about what the Sage Guru program was, and was that beneficial for you? I guess you were part of the Black Google Network. Is that how you found out about it, or?
So I got connected with the program, again, because I knew somebody. See the pattern, man. It's real consistent. And so I think they contacted me mostly because of my work at Hola, the Hispanic Googler Network, and also BGN. And I was also really active with ERGs, employee resource groups. Whenever I join a company, that's also a good thing that we should call out, is I always join those kinds of groups and organizations because I want to, A, network, but 2, I also want to know what I don't know and to really get an understanding of like how people move forward and sort of you can pattern match it a little bit. And so the Sage program I thought was really interesting and helpful. It wasn't it was not that it wasn't as helpful. I ended up leaving about shortly thereafter, not because of the Sage program, it was sort of in the works already. But one of the things that I find really interesting and helpful around those kinds of program is that access to folks at that senior level. And not that Google didn't give you that level of access, but it's very different when you take sort of a manager and you basically say, hey, you're matched with this person. Because one of the problems that I was running to at that level in my career was I was really good at networking with folks at my level. I didn't know what were the right mechanisms and patterns to get a good mentorship relationship with somebody at a very senior level. And I knew a lot of folks, but it took me a couple of years to discover is I had a really nice friendship with those people. But working out a actual helpful, beneficial mentoring, sponsoring relationship with an executive leader is a very different beast and requires a very different thinking about how you interact with this person, making sure you're making the best use of that time informally. And then the other thing that was really great too about the Sage program is also setting like a really level expectation, which is, hey, look, we want to improve the experience at this company for X, Y, and Z group of people. Let's just start with that as the basis. And then have that as a narrative, as an honest conversation. Because one of the things and this is one of the things, and again, not knocking Google, I have nothing but tremendous love for Google. It's very different when you have a conversation with somebody like, I want to move up in my career. And they obviously want to help you move up in your career. But sometimes there's some really strong institutional biases that prevent that from happening, which is like, I love Anthony, but, Jeff over here has been so great. And, me and Jeff get along. He loves golf. I love golf. And he loves my same sports team. And he grew up from the same town in Michigan that I did. And, G. Willikers, he's the guy. And it becomes very difficult as, somebody who's not the dominant group in that company to sort of say, hey, we got zero in common. I grew up in the Bronx. You know what I mean? I go to Dominican Republic. I eat plantains. So because you don't have that commonality in a mentorship relationship, or even when you're trying to get like a sponsorship relationship, it's not the first thing. So you end up sort of spending a lot of time playing around and talking in coded languages about these different topics. And as a person of color, it could be a bit uncomfortable to sort of broach that conversation. What was wonderful about the SAGE program is that was the base. Hey, we get that there's something here and we want to bring that in. So let's talk about that. And you could be like, hey, person, yeah, it hasn't been super great. And yeah, there's some uncomfortable things. And maybe one of the reasons that you think I'm maybe standoffish or don't respond to certain things is I'm feeling like a fish out of water. By establishing it as a base, okay, great, that's what this means. And now we want to sort of give you the tools to figure out what a mentorship relationship looks like. It changes the conversation, right? Because then you could say, okay, well, then this is what a performance cycle looks like. Here's what you need to do to get there. What's your plan? Okay, well, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about doing this, that, and the third. Okay, these three things, useless, not helpful organizationally. They're going to pat you on the back for this, but no one's really going to elevate your work here because you and 90 other people are doing this. These two things that you don't think are really important, yeah, double down on that sucker. And then when I'm in conversation with other folks, I can have that conversation naturally rise up to the top. That's a very different conversation than when we're just saying, hey, we're buddies, let's hang out. And that's one of the things that was great about SAGE and some of these other programs that I was lucky enough to be involved in, is they really helped me get very crystal clear on how to get the best bang for my buck on the mentorship relationships. And also, I'll be honest with you, like until like 2015, 2016, I had never heard of the word sponsorship, right? It's like, do you have a sponsor at the company? Do you have somebody sort of looking out for you? I'm like, what the hell is that? Sponsorship? Like Adidas, Nike? What are you talking about? But having somebody frame that like, no, this person is very invested in career. They want to help you get to the next level. They're going to speak on your behalf. They're going to advocate. They're going to evangelize on your behalf. But you got to give them something to talk about. That's a thing. Like people were doing this before I got here. Like what the hell? I've been wasting my time, but I've been less efficient. And so now having that as a paradigm now, when you talk to different leaders and being able to say, hey, I want a mentorship relationship. Oh, does that just mean we do 30-minute one-on-ones and we sort of casually talk about stuff? And in the last 10 minutes, you bring up the big question? No, it's that when we have that question, we got 25 focused minutes to talk about, here's what I've been doing for the last 3 weeks. Here's what I'm going to do for the next 3 weeks. Help me course correct, or am I missing anything? And then give you really actionable feedback. Or leadership is really going to be excited about this thing in about 4 months. They're going to announce it potentially. You got to get ahead of that curve. What does it look like to get you ahead of that curve? Oh, okay, I'll do X, Y, and Z. Does that help?
Yeah. So you found at least these two programs that both seem pretty valuable for you. And maybe SAGE you left a little bit in the midst of, but you still got some value out of SAGE and Inroads. There might have been some other programs along your journey as well. How can people be more proactive about looking out for these sort of things? And what other recommendations would you have for people 5 to 30 years of experience that are looking to grow and develop their career? So Inroads sounds like something earlier age, but like, what do you recommend for folks now that come to you of saying, hey, there are these organizations that can help support you? Because like, I don't think you've missed the boat. Like, is there no opportunity for any other support? There must be some other like recommendations that you have for folks.
Oh, for sure. So, man, really good question. So I think one of the things that's really helped me out in my career is I'm always sort of looking for more knowledge and looking for more experience, because I don't know what I don't know. And I'm not going to find out unless I ask the questions. So one of the things that I like to do with a lot of the folks that I sort of meet with informally, especially if I'm thinking about them for mentorship or potentially career guidance, is I ask them, how do you get here? Right? How'd you get to this role? And how I sort of discover those programs is, hey, and this is not a big secret in corporate America, is like and this is what the benefit of like an Inroads was, or SAGE is like, there is a very strong corporate interest in getting more diverse folks and women into leadership. They want to do it. So in my mind, I'm always thinking, how does that personify itself at a company? How does that personify itself as a nonprofit or for-profit? There's always going to be people who want to help, or, they're either at the company and their job is like they're in HR or diversity recruiting or D&I, and they're going to be very focused and they'll have a lot of programs. And oftentimes they will advertise that very broadly that, hey, we're doing this thing. We match you with a mentor, or we rotate you out, or we have an excellence program, we have a career accelerator. Words, words, words. They'll always have some framing of it, and they'll usually be pretty vocal about it. So that's one thing is I kind of go to the website and identify it. If I can't identify it, then I just go to where the well is water overrunneth. What the hell does that mean? Go to MBA programs. Every single Fortune 500 company that's trying to hire the best and the brightest has an MBA program. They go to these companies, they go to these schools, and they're pitching the hell out of them why they're the best and greatest thing. And a lot of times people in those organizations and groups will manifest there as well. Case in point, Inroads recruiting at universities and college campuses. That's where the students are, right? Same thing with the MBAs, right? Like, and you don't got to go to Harvard for that. You could just kind of go to the website and check out what they've done. So I pay a lot of attention to sort of what the MBA programs are doing and who and what programs are sort of going there. The other thing too is diversity and inclusion is now an official industry in space. And, it's generating a bunch of bajillion dollars in cash. You can kind of just go online on Google and just sort of broadly search for diversity and inclusion programs, programs that sort of help you sort of scale up and level up. Sometimes they manifest as career coaches, as accelerator programs. And all those programs usually have like somebody with a ton of experience who's trying to make a change in the space. So when you get those opportunities, you seize them. I always like reach out, try to have a conversation because I am personally interested in getting, I'm one of those folks that got very, very lucky in my career, and I always want to help out the next generation. So if I can find somebody who's working in that space, I'm always going to be like, hey, how can I help? And the second part of it is like, hey, how can you help me? So that's usually a lot of the discovery process. It's one, every company worth its weight has some version of diversity and inclusion. What is that team doing? Where are they? How are they manifesting? They usually have some kind of link on LinkedIn, or there's some activity on Twitter, or they're on some college campus and stuff like that. Get involved, have a conversation, figure out what the ERGs look like. And if you're looking for something more external, diversity and inclusion is just a wide open space. Executive coaching is a wide open space. Reach out, vet out those programs. And then if you don't know, go to your network. And that's one of those things, like I'll have conversations with folks and say, hey, Alan, hey, Jeff, hey, Tom, hey, whatever. How did you get here? Oh, I was part of a fraternity program. And now the fraternity program has this mentorship program for people at the mid-level career. Or, hey, I was part of MLT, Management Leadership for Tomorrow, and they have an MBA prep program. And so just figure out those organizations, do broad searches, and then work your networks, especially those folks who you see are making those big leaps. That's usually an indication that either this person's a genius and you can learn from a conversation there, or they're in some kind of acceleration program. And then you just reach out to them and say, hey, man, I see that last year you were an associate and this year you're director of operations. What's up? Like, how did you do that? What was the big jump? And it's like, oh, I got into this really cool program with like Warren Buffett and I did it for 5 months and now I'm like a savant. Like, great, get me into that program. Who do I got to call?
So you're really comfortable reaching out to folks, which I am as well. Not everybody is. What do you think has made you so comfortable of reaching out? I'm sure more times than not, people are not going to respond, or maybe about 50-50. I don't know, maybe better than that. But a decent chunk of time, people aren't going to reply. But that doesn't dissuade you. So what do you think is different in your mindset than some others that will think, oh, this person is going to find me to be a bother or not reply, or everybody must reach out to them? What's different in your mindset?
So one, I think I have a natural advantage. I'm definitely an extrovert. And so having conversations, always being energetic and feeding my own personal energies with interactions with folks just gives me a bit of an advantage over somebody who's a little bit more introverted. But I don't think that that's sort of a limiter. So I think there's a few things that I do that really helps out. One, I think there's a mental block with a lot of folks that basically says, kind of you alluded to it, which is like, I don't want to be a bother. I don't want to be a burden. A few things there. One, networking and career searching is a numbers game. I mean, everyone's really excited about my resume and my background and say, wow, look at all these really cool companies you're at. No one asked me how many companies I interviewed to get to this point, how many places I reached out to, right? Like on the order of 1,000 companies, honestly. And so you have to have a thick skin and just say, hey, look, the average I don't know what it was, but like the average search for a job is like 100, 200 companies. So like, just get comfortable with it. Like, hey, you just need one person to pick up the phone and say yes. So that's just sort of grid that person to basically say, I need to get through a lot of interactions and be okay with that. The other thing too, is that there's a lot of incredible technology out there, LinkedIn and all these various tools like Angels List, Jobs, and all these different forums. So a lot of times you don't need to have 100 interactions. You can maybe write a small segment of text on LinkedIn and just basically like, right, hey, I'm Anthony. I'm really interested in your career. I'm super interested in your company. I'd love to like set up 30 minutes and learn more about your role or more about how you got here, and just copy paste that and blast that out to 50 people. And it's funny, I have a friend of mine who reached out to me and is trying to figure out what's next for them career wise, and isn't as naturally extroverted as me. And one of the greatest pieces of advice is I said, hey, you don't have to talk to a lot of people, but why don't you treat your LinkedIn as a public opportunity to sort of talk about it? It's like, oh, my LinkedIn's updated. Really? How often do you post? Do you interact with other people on LinkedIn, or are you just waiting for a recruiter to just fall on your lap? Like, you need to not wait for Superman. So for somebody who's more introverted, I'm not asking you to talk to 500 people. What I'm asking you to do is be a little bit more active on your LinkedIn searches and on your LinkedIn presence. And so that doesn't require a lot of energy. It means you read 4 or 5 articles a week. Maybe you post 2 of them, or maybe you make an effort to like find interesting conversations in LinkedIn with companies that you want to talk to, or people who work at companies that you want to be at, and basically comment and basically say, hey, Alan, absolutely. That seems really interesting. I think jumping around in careers is absolutely beneficial, because it gives you a natural advantage in search with recruiters and hiring managers to basically see, I see Anthony's profile showing up 2-3 times a week, always on topics around product management. Maybe this guy's worth the conversation. Or when he reaches out to me in a couple of months and it's like, hey, hey, Sarah, I hear that they're hiring at really awesome company 10. I think I can add a lot of value, right? It's different than like, I've never seeing a profile that's just never active versus seeing that this person is like constantly sort of having conversations around product management. And you can kind of weed through their thinking and be like, okay, maybe this person is the most extroverted person in the world, but they're very interested in this topic and they have really interesting ideas. It kind of represents. That's one way. And I think the third thing, especially for folks who are, and again, I use the paradigm for introvert and extrovert, but I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. I think one of the other things that you really just can't downplay and you need to break through the silo of that is networking, right? So networking, you think, oh, I don't have any value to add there. Every company in the world wants to hire the best and the brightest. There's an incentive there. A lot of these companies have referral programs for a reason. They want to find you, make yourself easier to find. So having conversations with folks, it doesn't need to be so transactional. It could just be, hey, I want to learn, I want to skill up, I want to learn your story. And if that just so happens in a few years to become a role or a job opportunity, that's absolutely fine. So I think you got to break yourself away from the idea of like, I am being a burden, and more, maybe I can be helpful to this person, right? And if you have like a mentality that like, I have nothing to add, you need to then, I'll say this sort of in a gentle way, but if you feel like, oh, I have nothing to add, then find something to add, right? There is a new technology that's rolling out there. There's a new, maybe competitive analysis that they haven't seen. There is a new perspective on a piece of work that they've launched. There's an area of opportunity that maybe the competitor has overlooked, right? Like if you don't think you have value to add, then go find value for yourself, right? Because every single company always has less employees to chase after the big opportunities, right? But if you're an outside force who's basically out there basically saying, hey, Facebook, I am Meta. Hey, Meta, there's this really cool opportunity that you're not thinking about here. I'd love to sort of talk to you a little bit about what that opportunity can look like. Alan, you're 1,000,000% right. You're going to message that to 50 people and 48 of them are going to say no, but 2 of them might say yes. Yep. And again, you just need one person to be like, hey, this guy's analysis is way off, but he's on to something. Let's bring him in for an interview. And that's all it takes.
And the beauty of that is like, even if it's an informational interview or a chat, if someone's responding to you, there's a lot of selection bias there that the person is probably more generous with their time and more willing to help than those other 48 people. Maybe some of those 48 people were just busy or something, but they might not have gone above and beyond.
Exactly. And the other thing too, and I was talking to my other friend about this as well, is you cannot take it personally. If 48 people don't respond to you, I always like to tell them this way: are you an inbox 0 person? Like, how many unread emails do you have in your inbox? Like, it's not that you don't have, like, do you despise every single person who's emailed you, or do you not have enough time? Like, you have to assume assume best intentions from other people unless otherwise proven. And so again, like, and I don't exaggerate, like when I'm in job search mode, I'm doing 50 a week. Right. And it's like, you copy paste something relatively generic, but you want to put sprinkle a couple of specific comments in there, and I'll send out 50 a week. And 50 sounds like a lot until you think about it's just 10 a day.
How do you actually do that? Is that through LinkedIn or through email?
I have 2 rubrics. So one is I am constantly, no matter whether I'm at a company or not looking at a company, I always have like a personal goal to like connect with one or two people in my industry outside of my company a month. And so what that means is once or three or four times a month, not three or four, maybe 2, 3 times a month, I'm having a conversation with like a product director at another company or like a senior engineer at somewhere other place with no agenda. I'm not trying to get a job. I'm just trying to learn more or catch up or see what you guys are doing or figuring it out. So that's one thing, because if you never turn that spigot off, then in 5, 6 years, when I finally want to make that conversation, it's not like, hey, we met 10 years ago. What's up? It's more like, hey, remember we talked a couple of months ago? You have that really cool thing you guys are working on. I'm interested in. So that's table number one. Table number two, though, when I'm sort of looking and searching, is I do that. Essentially, I have kind of like going back to college, right? Very pivotal for me. So I kind of use that framework all the time. Is you have like your reach companies, you have your middle tier companies, and you have companies like, I wouldn't mind working there. It'd be a really cool experience. So I have my tier of companies. So I'm always sort of following them. So when I finally turn on, hey, I want to work out here mode, I already have been reading articles about the company. I have a few things that I want to bring up. What you want to do is not be the person who's like, company awesome, just released this thing that they just released into 1,000 markets. Don't be the person to be like, hey, I heard you guys just released it to 1,000 markets. Like, think a couple of steps ahead, which is like, hey, I saw that you guys launched into 1,000 markets. If you're thinking about a couple of new markets that you can reach out to, I think it'd be really interesting for you guys to target Ghana, because your competitors in that space as well, and they're seeing a markup, they're seeing a margin of like 13%. Here are the two products that I think would do really well. Like, if you're sending that level of specificity to 50 companies, that's not sustainable. But for your 3 or 4 target companies, you should be able to spare that, right? But then for those regular companies, not regular, that's not fair, but like the companies that maybe you're a little less excited, but you're still interested in, you could still like send in, hey, Alan, congratulations on Tesla. You guys are doing really wonderful. I've had the opportunity to work on facial recognition at this really great company. And I think I could add a lot of value for whatever you guys are doing around facial recognition in the cars. Would love to chat about, if there's a connection here. And then for the company, sort of a layer beneath that, you can essentially say, hey, company X, you can put this all together in Excel in like 30 minutes, where you build a real simple paragraph and it just plugs the person's name in. And then you just take all the names and you're done. And you're basically, in 30 minutes, you're sending it out to 50 companies. You can keep it a little bit more generic, which is like, hi, my name is Anthony Hernandez. I've spent the last 8 years or 15 years in various products and business development roles. I've been really interested in your company and what you guys are doing. I see that you have a number of roles that are open for hiring. Do you think you have 15 minutes to maybe speak with me and help me make sure I have like the right approach in my resume to sort of talk with? That's something you can generically copy and send to 30 companies and be done for the week and go from there.
So do you currently have a list of companies that you're like, I know you just joined OpenSea and you're excited about that, but it sounds like you're always like thinking about your next step and your career and so forth. So do you have a list of companies that you admire or that you would that you're like just focused on?
Oh, for sure. So, and this probably speaks a little bit more to me, but I'm really interested in technology. So I learned a long time ago, if you're really interested in technology, and particularly technology startups, you follow VCs. So a lot of what I do is sort of follow really interesting VCs venture capitalists that have a very clear idea around what they think the future of the industry is. And whatever company they sort of invest in, I'm always paying attention to. So what I'll do is there are some folks that I just follow them pretty religiously. Whenever they mention a company, I usually take a look and I'll be like, oh, what are they doing? Oh, that's really interesting. Or, that's kind of a weird bet. I don't think that's going to be the future of work or the future of healthcare. And out of that, I'll sort of curate a small list. The list is always a running list. So it kind of shifts up and down. I usually try to look at it every quarter, and I'll just have 4 or 5 companies that I'm really excited about, and I'll just follow them and track their stories and sort of see what they're doing. I have other companies that I just really like their execution, as a product person. And I'm like, man, whenever they do something, they just do it right. I just got to get better as a product manager to figure out how do I position myself? How do I get my products into a better place? So it ends up being sort of this weird admiration thing. I like working there, but also I'm stealing ideas. I'm like, yeah. How did you roll out your onboarding? How do you make your onboarding so smooth? It's 5 clicks and my onboarding is 14 clicks. I'm going to spend some time thinking about that, because to your point, right? In a couple of months, or not a couple of months, I'm very happy to OpenSea. Let's call it 10 years from now. And 10 years from now, when I'm looking for the next great thing, it's really interesting to be hey, I love your company. You guys are great. It's also more interesting to a hiring manager to be Hey, Alan. Man, first of all, congratulations. I've been following your career for a number of years. I remember when you first joined Pear as a product manager, and now you're director of product. I'm not sure if you were involved with it, but you guys had like the best onboarding flow I've ever seen for a product. Full disclosure, I stole your onboarding flow. We ended up seeing a 50% increase in onboarding, and like our churn went way, way down. So, whether you want to meet up with me and have a quick 15-minute chat, I just want to thank you for your incredible product execution. If I'm a product person and this guy's been following me like a sports team, I'm going to have that call. I'd be like, yes, you're right. That onboarding flow was amazing. My manager didn't give me that credit. So that's what I do. I sort of have these couple of companies. There's something about those companies that I like. And so usually I'm getting very clear on what those things are. And then again, at some future state, or I decide I want to reach out to them, I'll sort of pull from that book and basically say, hey, company A, you did this really cool, awesome thing a couple of years ago. Sometimes too, even the product people will sort of announce like, hey, we're Amazon and we just launched in this really cool territory and we're really excited for folks to go out there. A lot of times those things go into the ether. But if you save that screenshot and then in 3 years be able to go back to Alan and be like, man, congratulations on launching in Mordo. I'm making it up, Lord of the Rings, right? Like for launching here, to a product manager or to anybody who's worked on something and maybe didn't feel like they got the light and shine, to have somebody come out of the blue and basically say, I remember when you did that dope thing and dope thing was very dope. I'm taking that call because that shows a level of interest and resiliency that you're just not going to see from the average candidate.
So how many companies are on your list now, approximately?
Good question. I actually looked at it last week. I have 7 companies.
Would you mind sharing some of their names?
Yes, I can share them. It was 8 companies, but I joined them. I joined one of them. So one is Stripe. Really interested in what they're doing. They're building an incredible business. Patrick, the leader, the 2 founders over there are just wicked sharp, and I think they're doing incredible things. Solana in the cryptocurrency space, they just have a really sharp, incredible team. They're building a fantastic product in currency and Sol for the crypto folks out there. Another company that I'm really interested in is Netflix. Reed has built a monster, and also Bozama, who recently joined the company, I think a year ago as their CMO, is just an incredible marketer. And I think whatever she works, if it was gold, turns into platinum or diamonds. And so I'm always sort of following her career and her moves, and particularly how she positions products. I'm a product person, and if I had her marketing chops, I would be able to make companies walk on water. Other companies that I think are really interesting is Pipe. So Pipe is down here in Miami, and they're doing venture debt for startups. The idea is instead of you giving up all your equity, if you have like sustainable reoccurring revenue, instead of you mortgaging your future, you could just use Pipe to sort of get financing based on your current revenues, and they'll take care of you for a couple of years. I think that's a big paradigm shift in venture capital and startup financing. So I think they're very exciting and interesting. Another company that I think is kind of exciting and fun is Spotify. I think what they're doing around content and podcasts and scaling up their technology, I think is going to be really, really interesting in the future. And so I'm always sort of keeping an eye on what they're doing. And then in the other space, I really like, 2 companies that I kind of find really interesting. A space company down here in Miami is launching some really cool stuff. And I think they're solving a very acute problem in the spacefaring industry. And I think it's this area where people think, oh, space travel is like 20, 30 years in the future. That's not going to have any real implications for today. But if SpaceX has not taught us anything, it's that once you crack that first barrier to making space travel consistent and safe, then a whole lot of business models and opportunities open up. And I think that they're in a very unique space to sort of seize that moment and deal with some of the logistical supply issues there. So that's one of the companies that I'm kind of very interested in. And then Cruise, they're essentially solving autonomous vehicle and car operations. So those are some of the companies. And I have 7 that I think are really, really interesting.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I believe it's 7. Awesome. That's great to you're so conscientious about this, and I think it has served you well throughout your career. So want to wrap up here. Last question I have for you. What sort of advice do you offer people? So I know you get a lot of advice from others, and I know you're also a giving person yourself. So are there some top pieces of advice, either parables or books or mediums that you advise people most often?
Oh man, I do. So I read a lot. I'm a big reader. So I think I have pretty good fountains of sort of inspiration and knowledge that I think might be helpful. So one book that I've been reading recently and I've been really finding helpful is Atomic Habits. And sort of it kind of alludes to people like to measure themselves against goals, and it's more important your process. And I believe James Clear, I think, is the author, fantastic writer. One thing that's really stayed with me is people don't rise to their goals, they fall to their systems. So if you don't have a good system in place, then you're going to like work yourself up for your motivation. You're going to do the thing or you're going to miss your thing and you're going to fall apart. And I think one thing that's been really helpful for me in my career is that, like I said, like I don't ever, people are like, well, you turn on search mode and you turn off search mode. Like, no. The process is about getting better. So if you're constantly out there communicating, reaching out, networking, to give you a more useful colloquialism, you don't have to get ready if you stay ready, right? Like if you're constantly looking and researching and trying to get better and sharing information, then when you finally reach out to somebody and say, hey man, I'm thinking about an opportunity, it's not like, Anthony, I haven't seen that guy since high school. It's like, Anthony, that guy posts 7 times a day about product. Like this guy's on it. So that's one thing that's been really helpful. Good to Great is just a fantastic book, which is a lot of really good examples and really great examples for just how to get better and deliver strong results and keep yourself accountable and be useful in whatever mechanism and organization that you're joining. So I really like that book. And then more personally as a product person, and I forgot the author, so forgive me, author, if you ever read this, but you're phenomenal. Build Better Products. It's a woman writer, and she's just put together this incredible book of all really practical examples of product issues with solutions that were actually implemented, and oftentimes by the actual people who implemented it. And I often use it sort of as like a Bible or like a reference guide. Like, man, like how do we get people to like go from testing the product to buying the product? I got 5 examples from like Google or Apple or Netflix or Amazon on how this was done. And so that book is really helpful. And then I'm not just saying this because I worked there recently, but Working Backwards. And I forgot the writer again, but I believe it was the person worked with Jeff Bezos for a number of years and sort of collected all these really great anecdotes and frameworks for sort of how they do things the Amazon way, which is, again, it's an incredible process. And again, huge shout out to all my colleagues at Amazon. I learned an incredible amount from them, but the book has been really like helping me crystallize that process. Those are sort of the books and ideas that I sort of draw from is Build Better Products, Working Backwards, Good to Great, really, really great book. And Atomic Habits.
Yeah. And Working Backwards is by Bill Carr and Colin Breyer, I believe. Yeah. And Build Better Products by Laura Klein.
You're good. Yes, exactly right.
I just Googled it here while I was on the call. So, but I did know Atomic Habits and Good to Great. They were both on my Audible list, and I will add those other 2 as well. So you're causing me a lot more time to walk and listen to great books. So I appreciate that. Anthony, I don't want to take too much more of your Sunday afternoon. This was an amazing conversation. It's so interesting to hear your path and your success and your deliberate nature about it and where it's gotten you. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more excitement ahead. And I'm sure we'll have additional conversations as not that you're leaving OpenSea anytime soon, but just the fact that, it's just been an amazing career. And I've really appreciated getting to know you more since our time at Google.
Yeah, for sure. Alan, thank you for the time. It's been great. And if folks have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. And also just a personal thank you to you as well. So you've been incredibly helpful. I'm not going to miss the opportunity to say it's incredibly helpful in my own career and helping me sort of figure out what's next and the right way to position things. And to your point, sort of back and forth on a few companies. So anytime you need me, man, call me up. You're my brother. I'm here to help. Let me know.
Cool, dude. And where's the best way that people can reach out to you? What medium?
On LinkedIn? On LinkedIn, for sure. Anthony Hernandez, and there's a million of us, but you could just put in the companies.
You look at Anthony Hernandez at OpenSea, Google, Amazon, Royal Caribbean, you'll probably be the only one that comes up there.
I'm the only guy for now. Maybe there'll be some more in the future, hopefully. Maybe they're out there now.
Well, all right. Thank you for listening to the SICK Podcast, and a very big thank you to Anthony Hernandez for talking with Alan on the podcast today. Make sure you connect with us at sickpodcast.com. That's SYCK. Did you know that you can leave an audio message for Alan on the website to get started on steering your career with Kadima? Alan, great show today. What's in store for the next episode?
Thanks a lot, Russ. And on those audio messages, I do listen to every one of those, so please do drop me a note there. But on the next episode, we have a career coach, also a life coach, this woman, Amelia Noel, who I met through networking, and I've learned a lot from her, and she's going to be dropping some great sick advice on Acceleration Nation next time.
Perfect. We look forward to hearing from Amelia. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and you are going to love the next one.